So imagine this. You're an actor. You land the role of a lifetime. The character becomes iconic, and the movie makes hundreds of millions of dollars. And suddenly, you're famous around the whole entire world. But it's not the dream you thought it would be. In fact, it's a never, ever, ever ending nightmare because you've started to despise the character but can never escape it, no matter how hard you try. So guess what happens? The character only becomes even more popular. And now you absolutely hate everything about the role that made you famous. With a passion. There's a special kind of Hollywood tragedy that happens when actors become prisoners of their own success. These are the stories of stars who actively hated the characters that define their careers. And their hatred? It shows in every single interview, every promotional appearance, and every forced smile. Let's start with Robert Pattinson, who played Edward Cullen in the Twilight series. Before Twilight, Pattinson was a relatively unknown British actor who'd had a small role in Harry Potter and a Goblet of Fire. But then, he got the lead role in Twilight, and the 5 Twilight movies made well over $3 billion worldwide. So almost overnight, Pattinson went from complete obscurity to one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Now, by all accounts, Edward Cullen was the role of a lifetime. The character became a cultural phenomenon that defined an entire generation's romantic fantasies. This not only gave Pattinson massive fame, but also enormous leverage in Hollywood. He went from auditioning for small parts to literally having the biggest studios compete for his attention and beg him to take on the leading role in blockbuster movies. And what's more, he was able to command millions per film. I mean, he had the type of momentum and devoted fan base that most actors spend decades trying to build. But there was only one problem. Pattinson hated Edward Cullen from day one. And it showed.
When I read it, it seemed like it was a book that wasn't supposed to be published.
There's a lot of stuff in the Twilight world that doesn't make any sense. It's like, why are they still going to high school? It was so long.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, and we were shooting it forever.
If Edward was not a fictional character and you just met him in reality, you know, he's one of those guys who'd be like an axe murderer. It's like literally, like, you could just tell he'd just freak out one day and shoot someone.
In interviews during the promotional tour for the first movie, Pattinson said, "The more I read the script, the more I hated this guy. So that's how I played him, as a manic depressive who hates himself."
My entire performance is based on having extreme discomfort, having contact lenses in your eyes. Just kind of like that the entire time. It's kind of a mixture of looking like slightly constipated and stoned. I mean, that's just quite easy to achieve.
And guess what? He was dead serious. Throughout the entire 5-movie franchise, Pattinson consistently mocked Edward's character in interviews. He called him a stalker. He made fun of the sparkling vampire concept. He openly questioned why anyone would find Edward romantic. And this was all while he was supposed to be selling these movies to millions of teenage fans.
When he put it the bare facts out, he tells I'd killed 40 or 50 people, and he's like, you really shouldn't, and I want to kill you so much. Every single day, every moment I'm with you, I desperately wanted to kill you. And she's like, I don't care, I love you. And it's like, well, there's definitely something wrong with her, and there's very obviously something wrong with me.
Because you're playing a psychopath. but if you hadn't noticed.
I was convinced that Stephanie was convinced she was Bella. And especially when she says, oh, it was based on a dream, and it's like, oh, I had this dream about this really sexy guy, and she just writes this book about it. It's like, this woman is mad. He's like, what am I doing with this kid? I'm 108 years old.
And you can see it in his performance. Pattinson looks genuinely uncomfortable in almost every scene. And do you remember all that brooding? Well, it wasn't acting. It was real frustration from having to play a character he found ridiculous.
There's a lot of books in the Cullen household, but know what to expect when you're expecting a half vampire child.
No, they look on Google Images. That was one of the funniest scenes I've ever had to do in my life. It's like, really? We're all like 300-year-old geniuses, and we just go, it's like, vampire baby, like, on Google Images. And yeah, that was our research into it. It's like, I can't find anything!
Millions of Twilight fans out there just cannot wait to see this. It's very almost heartbreaking because they don't want it to be over.
Yeah.
It's a little bittersweet, isn't it?
For them.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes the cruel irony of Hollywood's success. Sometimes the role that makes you famous is the role that you hate the most. Pattinson spent years trying to rebuild his career as a serious actor, taking increasingly experimental indie roles to prove he was more than just Edward Cullen. In the end, Pattinson got his revenge in the most Hollywood way possible. He used his Twilight millions to fund his transformation into critically acclaimed indie films, essentially using Edward Cullen's money to erase the real-life physical embodiment of Edward Cullen from Hollywood. Today, he's Batman and a respected character actor, but it took him over a decade to escape the vampire that made him rich and miserable at the same time. Now, here's one that most people are already familiar with, but I guarantee you have no idea how deep the hatred goes, and how many times this actor has literally begged anyone that would listen for his iconic and incredibly popular character to be killed off. I'm talking about none other than Harrison Ford playing Han Solo. Now, what most people don't know is that Ford was a carpenter before Star Wars. He was literally building cabinets when George Lucas cast him in what would become one of the most recognizable and iconic roles in movie history. The original Star Wars trilogy made well over $1 billion worldwide, which was the first franchise to ever do this. All of this turned Ford into one of the biggest, richest, and most influential movie stars on the planet. And the character Han Solo would have been the dream role for so many actors. A charismatic, lovable rogue who ultimately becomes a hero, and one that's a central character in what was, at the time, the biggest franchise in cinema history. But was Harrison Ford happy with all the success and being able to play such a great character? Nope, not even close. He wanted Han Solo dead. Literally. I mean, Ford was begging Lucas to kill off Han Solo as early as The Empire Strikes Back in 1980.
What could be better than this? You told me last time you were here that you've been pushing for many years to have Han Solo killed off, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody. I hope at this point everyone who wants to see the movie has seen the movie, but you succeeded.
You work for like 25 years for the company.
Yeah.
You do your best. You show up every day. You do your job. And then they just let you go.
In this case, they actually killed you.
Shocking. Shocking.
When you saw yourself...
No, I argued for 30 years for this to happen.
Right.
And finally, I wore him down.
I guess you did. So you won't be in any of the other movies, or Han Solo won't be in any of the other movies?
Who said that?
When you saw yourself or Han Solo die on screen...
Do you know how much money you can make selling reverse mortgages?
Is that right?
You have no idea.
He felt the character had fulfilled his purpose and had no further room for development. Ford consistently criticized Han Solo as one-dimensional and lacking character development. He said he preferred playing Indiana Jones because he found that character more interesting and complex. When Return of the Jedi came out in 1983, Ford said, "3's enough for me. I was glad to see that costume for the last time." But of course that never happened. He was forced to return as Han Solo many more times. And you know what? You can definitely see Ford's frustration in the later Star Wars films. I mean, the man who thought he'd escaped the Millennium Falcon in 1983 found himself back in that same costume well into his 70s.
As far as the movie featuring a young Han Solo, I don't know what to think about that. I'm glad that somebody else is going to have the burden of being young and take care of that part. It's well beyond my understanding or control, and I of course want nothing to do with it in the nicest possible way.
Are you looking forward to watching a Han Solo movie as a fan?
Not really.
Now, I don't mean to move on to other parts of your career, but there's a Star Wars movie coming out. J.J. Abrams is directing it.
Yeah, look.
And I would love to know what your plans are for this.
You know, I can't.
You can't say what's going on?
You know, there's nothing. I can't talk.
One, did you shoot Greedo first, or did Greedo shoot you first?
I don't care.
The only way Ford finally got his wish was when Disney agreed to kill off Han Solo in The Force Awakens, giving him the character death he'd been begging for over 3 decades. I don't know about you, but when he finally got his wish and Han Solo was killed off, I think Ford looked genuinely relieved in that moment. Maybe even a little happy. But guess what happened after that? Disney still forced him back as a memory sequence in follow-up Star Wars projects. So it seems he's never going to truly escape this character. Next, let's talk about Sean Connery and James Bond. Now, this might be a surprise addition to this list, because Connery essentially created the definitive version of Bond. From 1962 to 1971, he played the character in 6 official Bond films that made hundreds of millions of dollars and helped cement a franchise that's still going today. This should have been a perfect partnership. Connery was handsome, charismatic, and had the perfect mix of danger and charm that Ian Fleming had envisioned. And the early Bond films weren't just successful, they were hugely popular. Connery's portrayal was so iconic that he basically became the template for every Bond actor that followed. The role gave him international superstar status, and the kind of cultural influence that most actors can only dream of. But there was only one issue. Connery grew to hate James Bond with a passion that was almost frightening in its intensity. In interviews, Connery said, "I have always hated that damn James Bond. I'd like to kill him." When asked about returning for future Bond films, he responded, "If I did another Bond movie, it would only be for the money." And guess what? He meant it. Connery felt trapped by the character's popularity. He wanted to be taken seriously as an actor, but everywhere he went, people only saw James Bond. The role that made him famous became a prison he couldn't escape. And honestly, you can see his growing frustration in the later Bond films. By Diamonds Are Forever in 1971, Connery looks bored and disconnected. He's going through the motions, collecting his paycheck and counting the days until he could walk away. But the real tragedy? Connery never fully escaped Bond's shadow, despite decades of trying to prove his range as an actor. And he perfectly exemplified the ultimate Hollywood paradox. Connery brought to life one of the most iconic characters in cinema history, earned millions of dollars, and achieved global fame that lasted his entire lifetime. But that same success became his artistic death sentence. No matter how many serious dramatic roles he took, from Indiana Jones's father to a Russian submarine captain, audiences still saw James Bond. And the character he brought to life dominated his identity for the rest of his life. Let's move on to Christopher Plummer, who played Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music from 1965. This movie made $286 million worldwide and became one of the most loved musicals in film history. It should have been a career-defining triumph for Plummer. Instead, he spent the rest of his life trying to live it down. Plummer famously described The Sound of Music as being so awful and sentimental and gooey. He found his character boring and even compared him to a dead horse. In interviews, he would refer to the movie as the sound of mucus, just to express his disdain. But here's what makes this even more tragic. Plummer was actually a classically trained Shakespearean actor. He wanted to be remembered for his stage work and his dramatic film roles. Instead, he became famous for singing about a small white mountain flower that rose in the Alps. The cruel twist came when Plummer discovered that his one moment of mainstream success had actually damaged his reputation among serious theater critics and directors. Many in the classical theater world saw his involvement in The Sound of Music as selling out, viewing the family musical as beneath someone of his Shakespearean caliber. So he ended up caught in a weird sort of no man's land. Too highbrow for Hollywood's musical crowd, but now tainted goods for the theater purists who had once respected him. He spent decades taking challenging dramatic roles and returning to Shakespeare just to prove he was more than Captain Von Trapp. Eventually, Plummer did manage to reclaim his reputation through sheer persistence and talent, earning widespread respect for roles in films like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Beginners, which finally won him an Oscar at age 82. But it took him nearly 5 decades of deliberate career choices and countless interviews distancing himself from Captain Von Trapp to finally be seen as the serious dramatic actor he had always wanted to be. The victory came, but it required a lifetime of effort to achieve what should have been his natural trajectory from the start. Now here's another James Bond actor that might have actually hated James Bond more than Sean Connery. I'm talking about Daniel Craig from 2006 to 2021. Craig breathed new life into the Bond franchise with Casino Royale, giving the character a tougher, more grounded, and emotionally complex portrayal. The 5 Craig Bond films made several $1 billion worldwide. And you know what? Craig's era wasn't just commercially successful. It was critically acclaimed in ways the franchise hadn't experienced in decades. Even today, Casino Royale has an 8 out of 10 on IMDb and between 90 to 94% score rating in both Rotten Tomato categories. So yeah, Casino Royale proved that Bond was still relevant and able to win at the box office while keeping fans happy. And at the time when the movie was first released, Craig was praised for bringing genuine depth and intensity to a role that had started to become somewhat of a parody. Now, for any actor, landing the role of James Bond during a creative and commercial renaissance should have been the ultimate career achievement, right? I mean, this role guarantees years of reliable work and financial security. But for Craig, it was torture, and it showed. There are countless memes of Craig looking absolutely miserable. In interviews promoting Spectre in 2015, Craig famously said he'd rather slash his wrists than play Bond again. When asked about future Bond films, he responded, "That's fine. I'm over it at the moment. We're done. All I want to do is move on."
You said some definitive things about whether or not you would continue
I
to play
did and
Bond.
I didn't. You know, I got asked 2 days after I'd finished an 8-month shoot whether I'd like to do another one, and I gave a fairly blunt answer.
Graphic answer.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, and you know, that I'm a straight talker. I don't, you know, I usually speak my mind, and the truth of it is I just don't know. I don't want to think about it at the moment. I think, you know, it's been an amazing ride doing this movie, and we've had incredible fun, and it's been a lot of hard work, but it has taken up all of my life for 2 years. And so maybe a little of my life back would be nice.
And you know, as been with you for the long haul. It's been what, 10 years?
That's right.
10 years. Does it feel like that for you?
Seems about 20.
In fact, it turns out he never wanted the role from the start, but the casting director and studio executives were obsessed with him getting the role. Listen to this.
Full rehearsal, quiet. Action.
Michael and I really wanted him. We only wanted him. The only problem was that he didn't want to do it.
A small detail, yes.
And you came into the office, and I remember he walked in, and I said to Michael afterwards, he wants to do it. It was the funniest thing. It was something about the way he was wearing French cuffs, and they weren't done up. And I just that thing somehow, I don't know why it was. I said, he wants to do it. And Michael's going, you think so? I said, yes, he does. And We were just determined to have him. It was like there wasn't anyone else. That kept freaking the studio out because we kept saying there is no one else. We don't want anyone else. And they kept trying to get us to meet people.
I suppose all of these sort of like hurdles, what I was saying to myself is, all right, what's going to happen is I'm going to get the script, I'm going to read it, I'm going to go, no, thanks very much, it's really nice. Because it's just like, I mean, ultimately that's kind of all an actor can do really, is be kind of like, go, you know, you read the script and you go, I don't like the script, sorry. Little did I know.
And you know what? If you look closely, you can see Craig's burnout, especially in his later Bond movies. I mean, the physical demands of the role clearly took a toll. But more than that, you can see his frustration with being trapped in this character for 15 years. In the end, Daniel Craig's Bond era left a lasting mark on the franchise, delivering both critical acclaim and box office success. But it obviously came at a huge personal cost. Then there's Kate Winslet playing Rose in Titanic from 1997. This wasn't just any movie. This was James Cameron's 3-hour epic that would literally change the course of cinema history. It became the first film to ever cross the $1 billion threshold at the worldwide box office, eventually sailing past $2 billion and holding the title of highest-grossing film for over a decade. So it's not surprising that it effectively turned a very young Kate Winslet into one of the most famous actresses on the planet, practically overnight. One day she was a promising young British actress known for period dramas like Sense and Sensibility. Then the next day, she was a global superstar that had her face plastered on magazine covers across the entire world. And why wouldn't it be? This was the ultimate career-making role. Winslet was working with James Cameron at the absolute height of his powers. I mean, he was fresh off Terminator 2 and True Lies, and then she was starring opposite Leonardo DiCaprio, who was already Hollywood's golden child, after Baz Luhrmann's highly successful Romeo and Juliet. Together, they were creating what would become not just one of the most successful movies ever made, but a genuine cultural phenomenon that took over the world and gave us that Celine Dion song that would get stuck in your head for days at a time. Now here's where the story takes a somewhat sad turn. Despite all this success, Winslet later expressed deep embarrassment about her performance in Titanic. And we're not talking about subtle hints of disappointment. She was brutally honest about her feelings. In multiple interviews over the years, she's said she was genuinely embarrassed watching herself in several scenes and wished she could go back and redo many moments. She once described watching herself in the film as absolutely awful and admitted she would like to do it again because she felt she could do it better. But here's what makes this situation particularly tragic and ironic. Winslet's performance in Titanic is actually quite good, especially considering she was just 22 years old and working on the most expensive film ever made at the time, with immense pressure and expectations. Her chemistry with DiCaprio is undeniable. She handles both the dramatic and romantic moments convincingly, and she brings genuine emotion to what could have been a boring, generic female lead that needs to be saved. But the real issue wasn't her performance, it's what happened after. The movie's overwhelming success meant that she had to work extra hard in order not to be typecast. Winslet went out of her way to deliberately seek out more challenging indie roles in movies like Hideous Kinky and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So she basically focused on movies that allowed her to show her acting range in much more nuanced and complex roles. For Winslet, Titanic was both the best thing that ever happened to her career and in some ways, the worst. It opened every door in Hollywood, but also created expectations and associations that took her a very, very long time to escape.